The general's face drained of color the moment he saw the ring on my finger. The room around us, full of polished shoes, pressed uniforms, flags, and speeches, seemed to fade into a dull hum. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. He simply stared at my hand as if it didn't belong to me at all. "Where did you get this?" he asked. For a second I thought he was joking. Generals didn't react like that to cheap silver rings, but his eyes weren't curious. They were afraid. "It was my grandpa's," I said. "He passed away last month." The general swallowed hard. "We need to talk," he said quietly, "now." That was the moment I realized my grandfather, the man my own parents had let die alone, might not have been who I thought he was. My grandpa Thomas Hale was the quietest man I ever knew. He lived in a small, fading house on the edge of a sleepy Ohio town, the kind with cracked sidewalks and neighbors who'd lived there since the 70s. No fancy car, no medals on the wall, no stories about the war. If you asked him about his past, he'd smile politely and say, "That was a long time ago, sweetheart." Most people barely noticed him. My parents certainly didn't. To them, Grandpa was an inconvenience, a reminder of something they didn't want to think about. He didn't have money, he didn't have influence, he didn't have anything they could use. When he got sick, they didn't rush to his side. They didn't argue over who would help him. They didn't even call much. They said he was stubborn. They said he chose to live that way. They said he'll be fine. He wasn't. I was stationed 2 states away with the Marine Corps when I got the call from a neighbor. Grandpa had collapsed in his kitchen. They'd taken him to the county hospital. No family had shown up. I requested emergency leave that same night. By the time I arrived, he was already fading. Tubes, machines, quiet beeping sounds filling a small hospital room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. He smiled when he saw me. "Guess you're the only one who remembered me?" he whispered. I told him not to talk like that. I told him Mom and Dad would come soon. He just shook his head. "They won't," he said gently, "but that's all right." Those were some of the last clear words he ever spoke to me. He passed away 2 days later. No dramatic scene, no last confession, just a quiet breath and then nothing. When I called my parents, my mother sighed. "Well," she said, "at least he's not suffering anymore." That was all. No one offered to help with the funeral. No one asked what he wanted. No one even asked where he would be buried. So I did it myself. A small service. A simple wooden casket. 5 people total, including me and the priest. The neighbor who had called me came. So did an elderly man who said he'd once served with Grandpa, though he didn't say where or when. My parents didn't show up. My brother texted, "Sorry, busy week." I stood alone by the grave listening to dirt hit the casket and felt something settle inside my chest that I still can't fully explain. Not anger, not yet. Just a deep, quiet kind of grief. After the service, I went back to Grandpa's house to pack his things. Most of it was ordinary: old clothes, war movies on VHS, stacks of yellowed newspapers, a dusty toolbox in the garage. In his bedroom drawer, wrapped in a faded handkerchief, I found the ring. It wasn't flashy, just solid metal slightly worn with a strange symbol etched inside. Not a name, not a date, just a small marking I didn't recognize. I remembered him wearing it every day, never taking it off, not even when washing dishes. When I'd once asked about it as a teenager, he'd said, "It reminds me who I am." That was all. So I kept it. Not because I thought it was valuable, but because it was his. My parents never asked about it. They didn't ask about anything. They sold his house within 3 weeks. He didn't need it anymore, my father said. I moved on with my life, or at least I tried to. Back to base, back to routines, back to being strong and composed like Marines are supposed to be. But something about Grandpa's quiet life kept bothering me. He'd been a Navy SEAL. I knew that much. It was written on his old discharge papers tucked into a folder in the back of a cabinet. But beyond that, there was nothing. No photos, no records, no stories. It was like his entire military career had been erased. A few weeks later, I was invited to attend a formal military ceremony, an anniversary event honoring veterans. I went in uniform, polished boots, pressed jacket, the whole thing. I wore Grandpa's ring without thinking. It had become a habit. The hall was full of retired officers, medals, speeches about service and sacrifice. I shook hands, exchanged polite smiles, listened to familiar words I'd heard 100 times before. Then it happened. A general gray hair, strong posture, the kind of man people naturally stepped aside for, paused mid-conversation when he saw my hand. His eyes locked onto the ring. Not my face, not my rank, just the ring. He stepped closer. "Where did you get this?" he asked. And in that moment, standing under bright lights with flags behind me, I realized something was very wrong. Because no one had ever looked at Grandpa's ring like that before. And the man in front of me looked like he had just seen a ghost. The general didn't explain anything else that day. He simply asked for my name, my unit, and my grandfather's full name. He wrote them down on a small card, nodded once, and said he would be in touch. Then he walked away. I stood there for a long moment, surrounded by applause and polite conversations, feeling like the only person in the room who had just stepped into a completely different reality. On the drive back to base, I kept glancing at the ring on my finger. The metal felt heavier than it ever had before. The symbol inside seemed sharper, somehow more deliberate, like it had been waiting for something. Or someone. I called my mother that night. "Do you remember Grandpa's ring?" I asked. There was a pause on the other end. Vaguely, she said. "Why, a general recognized it. He acted like it was important." She laughed softly. "You're reading too much into things. Your grandfather liked pretending he was special." That word stuck with me, pretending. "Mom," I said carefully, "he really was a Navy SEAL." "Yes, yes," she replied. "In some minor unit. That was decades ago. It doesn't matter now." It mattered to him. "Well, it shouldn't matter to you," she said. "Focus on your own career, not his old fantasies." I hung up feeling colder than before. My father's reaction was worse. He sighed loudly when I brought it up, as if I were forcing him to relive an unpleasant memory. "Your grandfather was difficult," he said. "Always secretive. Always acting like he knew things he couldn't talk about. It was exhausting." "He saved lives," I said. "So do a lot of people," my father replied. "That doesn't make him a hero." I wanted to argue, to shout, to remind him that Grandpa had died alone in a hospital room while they went about their daily lives. But something told me they wouldn't hear it. They never had. Growing up, Grandpa was always treated like an afterthought. He wasn't invited to holidays unless I insisted. He was never consulted about family decisions. My brother once joked at Thanksgiving that Grandpa's biggest achievement was not getting arrested. Everyone laughed. Except me. I used to sit with Grandpa on the porch during those gatherings. He'd drink black coffee and watch the trees sway in the distance. "You don't have to stay with me," he'd say. "I want to," I'd reply. He'd smile, but his eyes always looked tired. Not old, just tired in a way that came from carrying something too heavy for too long. After the ceremony, I couldn't stop thinking about the general's reaction, so I did what Marines do when something doesn't make sense. I started asking questions. Not officially, not through command, just quietly. I reached out to a retired Navy officer I'd trained with years earlier. He'd served long enough to know people. I described the ring. There was a long silence on the phone. "I've seen something like that once," he finally said. "But it wasn't supposed to exist." "What do you mean?" "It's not something they put in museums," he replied. "Let's just say it's not for public recognition." "So what is it for?" He hesitated. "Proof," he said, "of things that never happened." That night I barely slept. The more I thought about it, the more Grandpa's life stopped making sense. He lived frugally, yet never worried about money. He had no visible assets, yet always paid his bills on time. He avoided doctors, avoided paperwork, avoided anything that required documentation. It was as if he was trying not to leave a trail. A week later, I received an email from an unknown address. "This is General Robert Whitmore. I would like to speak with you about your grandfather. Please contact my office." No subject line, no explanation. Just that. I didn't tell my parents. I drove to the address listed, which turned out to be a modest building near a veterans center. Not a base, not a headquarters. Just a quiet place with a small flag outside and a receptionist who seemed to recognize my name immediately. The general was waiting in a small office. No medals on the wall, no dramatic decor, just 2 chairs, a desk, and a faded photograph of a group of young men in outdated uniforms. He gestured for me to sit. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I shouldn't have reacted the way I did at the ceremony." "You recognize the ring," I said. "Yes," he replied, "and I was surprised to see it on someone so young." "It was my grandfather's." "I know," he said softly, "Thomas Hale." The way he said my grandfather's name made my chest tighten. "You served with him?" I asked. "In a manner of speaking," he said. "We were in the same operational group." "What group?" He studied me for a long moment. "One that doesn't appear in official histories," he said, "and likely never will." I waited. "Your grandfather was part of a small team assigned to missions that required absolute deniability," he continued. "No records, no recognition, no public acknowledgement. If they succeeded, nothing happened. If they failed, nothing happened either." "So he was invisible," I said. "By design." My hands curled into fists on my lap. "My family treated him like he was nothing," I said, "like he made up his past." The general nodded slowly. "That is often the cost of that kind of service." He leaned forward. "That ring is not a medal. It is a marker. It identifies individuals who were cleared for certain operations. Most of those men never spoke about it. Many of them didn't even tell their families." "So why did he keep it?" I asked. "Because it reminded him he existed," the general said, "even if the world was told he didn't." I thought of Grandpa's words. "It reminds me who I am." For the first time I understood what he meant. My parents had chosen to forget him. The military had chosen to erase him. But he had never erased himself. And now somehow the only proof he ever left behind was on my finger. I left the general's office with more questions than answers. The drive back felt longer than it should have. Traffic lights blurred past. Radio chatter faded into background noise. My mind kept replaying his words. Absolute deniability. No records, no recognition. It sounded like something out of a movie, not the life of the quiet man who used to fix my bike and make burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. When I got back to base, I took the ring off and studied it under my desk lamp. For years I'd seen it as just an old piece of metal. Now it felt different, like a locked door I didn't have the key to. I turned it over and over, tracing the symbol with my thumb. It wasn't decorative, it wasn't random. It looked functional, almost like a code. That night I opened Grandpa's old folder again, the one I'd found in his cabinet. Inside were only a few things: his discharge papers, a faded photo of him in uniform, and a folded letter I'd never read before. It wasn't sealed. It was just waiting. The letter was written in careful handwriting. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if you found the ring, then you're the only one who cared enough to look." My throat tightened. "There are parts of my life I was never allowed to explain. Not to your parents, not to anyone. That was the deal. But I want you to know this. I never regretted what I did. I only regretted what it cost the people around me. If someone important ever asks about the ring, tell them the truth. That it was mine. That I trusted you with it. That's all you'll need to say. No dramatic confession, no heroic summary, just that." I sat there for a long time, staring at the paper, realizing my grandfather had known this moment would come. He just hadn't known when. The next day I decided to do something my parents never did. I went to the local Veterans Center in Grandpa's town. The place was small, tucked between a hardware store and a closed diner. Inside, the walls were covered in photos, plaques, and framed flags. Most of the volunteers were in their 70s or 80s men who spoke slowly and shook hands firmly. I showed them Grandpa's name, Thomas Hale. At first, no one reacted. Then, one man, thin, white-haired, wearing a faded navy cap, stopped mid-sentence when he heard it. "Hale," he said. "Tom Hale." "Yes," I replied. "That was my grandfather." The man's eyes softened. "He used to come by here sometimes," he said. "Never stayed long. Just sat, listened, then left." "Did he talk about his service?" I asked. The man laughed quietly. "Tom never talked about anything he said, but we knew better than to ask." "Why?" He looked at me carefully. "Because some men carry things that don't want to be spoken," he said. "And you can see it in their eyes." I asked about the ring. The man's smile faded. "I've seen symbols like that," he said, "but only once, and that was in the early 70s. "What did it mean?" He shook his head. "It meant the person wearing it had done things that never happened," he said. "Officially." That phrase again? Things that never happened. I drove back to my parents' house that weekend. I didn't plan to confront them, not at first. I just wanted to see if there was anything else they'd kept, anything they'd thrown away without telling me. My mother was cleaning out the garage when I arrived. Old boxes, broken furniture, dusty memories. "Why are you here?" she asked. "I wanted to see if there's anything left of Grandpa's things," I said. She sighed. "We already got rid of most of it," she said. "No point keeping clutter." "What about his personal stuff?" I asked. She hesitated. "There was an old notebook," she said. "Your father threw it out, said it was useless. Do you remember what was in it?" She shrugged. "Just numbers, dates, nothing meaningful." My chest tightened. Numbers, dates, the kind of things that didn't want to be spoken. That night, I sat across from my father at the kitchen table. "Why didn't you ever ask Grandpa about his past?" I asked. He looked annoyed. "Because it didn't matter," he said. "We all have pasts. Some people just don't know how to let go of them." "He wasn't holding on," I said. "He was protecting something." My father scoffed. From what he lived in a small house and drove a 20-year-old truck. What exactly was he protecting? I didn't answer. I just stood up and walked away. For the first time, I realized something uncomfortable. My parents hadn't just ignored Grandpa. They had chosen not to see him. A week later, I received another message from General Whitmore. "There is something you should know about your grandfather. It may change how you see him and how your family does too." We met again, this time in a quiet conference room. He placed a thin folder on the table. "I can't show you classified documents," he said, "but I can show you what's been declassified." Inside were a few pages, redacted lines, blacked-out names, but enough remained to paint a picture. Operations in Eastern Europe, counterintelligence missions, extraction of personnel under false identities. And one repeated phrase. "Primary operative TH?" "That's him," I whispered. The general nodded. "Your grandfather was responsible for saving multiple intelligence assets during the Cold War," he said. "People who are still alive today because of him." "Why wasn't he honored?" I asked. "Because honoring him would reveal what never officially occurred," he replied. "So he disappeared instead?" "Yes." I stared at the papers, realizing the man my family dismissed as irrelevant had lived an entire life hidden in plain sight. "He never told anyone?" I said. "No," the general replied, and that was his greatest service. That night I sat in my car outside my parents' house holding the ring. I finally understood. Grandpa didn't die alone because he was forgotten. He died alone because he had spent his entire life making sure others were never exposed. And the one thing he left behind wasn't wealth. It was truth. A truth my family had never wanted to face. And now neither could I ignore it. The ceremony had been scheduled months in advance. It was a formal military commemoration for retired service members, flags, speeches, honor guards, the kind of event meant to celebrate sacrifice in a clean, organized way. Nothing about it was supposed to feel personal. But for me, it felt like walking into my grandfather's shadow. I wore my Marine Corps dress uniform that day, perfectly pressed, medals aligned, shoes polished until I could see my own reflection. The kind of appearance my parents always said Grandpa never achieved. He could have been something my mother once said. He just never tried hard enough. Now I stood among rows of decorated officers and aging veterans, feeling the weight of those words settled differently in my chest. I kept the ring on. Not out of defiance, not out of pride. Just because it felt wrong to take it off. The hall was large with high ceilings and soft patriotic music playing in the background. Families filled the seats, wives holding programs, children fidgeting with tiny flags, elderly men sitting a little straighter than their bodies allowed. I shook hands, exchanged polite nods, listened to familiar speeches about honor duty service. Then I saw him. General Robert Whitmore stood near the front, surrounded by a small group of officers. He looked exactly like you'd expect tall, composed, gray hair, calm authority in every movement. I wasn't even planning to approach him. He noticed me first. His eyes flicked down to my hand, and stopped. I felt it before he spoke, the shift in the air, the way people around us suddenly felt irrelevant. He stepped closer. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just one quiet step. "Excuse me," he said, his voice low. I turned toward him, ready to offer a formal greeting. But he wasn't looking at my face. He was staring at the ring. The symbol inside it seemed to catch the light. For a second he didn't say anything. Then his lips parted slightly, and he went pale. Not startled. Not curious. Frozen. "Where did you get this?" he asked. The words were soft, but something in his tone made my stomach tighten. It was my grandfather's, I replied. He passed away recently. The general's eyes didn't leave the ring. What was his name, he asked. Thomas Hale. That was when his expression changed completely. Not disbelief. Recognition. He swallowed once. We need to talk, he said quietly, privately. I hesitated. Is something wrong? He looked up at me for the first time. His eyes were steady, but there was something else behind them, something unsettled. That depends, he said, on whether that ring is real. I followed him into a small side room off the main hall. No windows, no decorations, just 2 chairs and a small table. The sounds of applause and speeches faded into muffled echoes. The general closed the door behind us. For a moment he didn't speak. He just sat across from me studying the ring again. Your grandfather never talked about his service, did he? He asked. No, I said. He avoided it. The general nodded slowly. That sounds like him. You knew him, I asked. He paused. Yes, he said, but not in the way you're thinking. I waited. There are units within the military that do not appear in public records, he continued. They exist for situations that require plausible deniability. I'd heard that phrase before. But hearing it from someone like him made it feel heavier. Your grandfather was part of one of those units, he said, for over a decade. My heart began to pound. Then why isn't there any record of him, I asked. Because officially he never served there, the general replied. He was a ghost, by design. I stared at him, struggling to connect this with the man who used to feed birds in his backyard and complain about rising grocery prices. What does the ring mean, I asked. The general leaned back slightly. It's not a medal, he said, it's not a rank. Then what is it? A verification marker, he replied, used internally to identify individuals cleared for operations that never existed. I felt a chill. So it's proof. Yes, he said, for people who are no longer supposed to be provable. I looked down at the ring again. And you recognized it immediately. He nodded. There are very few still in circulation, he said. Most were destroyed. Why wasn't his, I asked. The general's voice softened. Because some men keep reminders, he said, even when they're told to forget. I thought of Grandpa's letter. It reminds me who I am. My family treated him like he was nothing, I said quietly. Like he failed at life. The general's expression tightened. That is often the fate of people who serve in silence, he said. They don't get parades, they don't get recognition, they get forgotten. But he saved lives, I said. Yes, he replied. And because of that, he could never claim them. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger yet. Just clarity. Why are you telling me this, I asked. Because you're wearing something you shouldn't even know exists, the general said. And because you're his granddaughter. He hesitated. And because you deserve to know who he really was. I thought of my parents' words. He was difficult, he chose that life, he was nothing special. You said the ring might not be real, I said. What did you mean? The general met my eyes. If that ring is authentic, he said slowly, then it confirms certain operations we were never supposed to acknowledge. And if it's not, I asked. Then someone created a very convincing forgery, he replied, which would also be dangerous. My pulse quickened. Dangerous how? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward. If this is real, he said quietly, you're in possession of something that people once died to protect. The room felt smaller. Should I be worried, I asked. He studied me for a long moment. You're a Marine, he said. You know what it means to carry responsibility. Yes. This is heavier than most, he replied, but it's also not something you should face alone. What should I do, I asked. Nothing yet, he said. Just don't talk about it publicly, and don't let it leave your possession. Why? Because some secrets don't stay buried when they resurface, he said. They attract attention. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me, I said. The general stood. There's one more thing, he added. Yes. He looked at the ring one last time. Your grandfather wasn't forgotten by everyone, he said, only by those who chose not to see him. Then he opened the door. The ceremony continued outside as if nothing had happened. Applause. Speeches. Flags waving gently. But for me, everything had changed. Because the quiet man my family dismissed as irrelevant had just been recognized by the highest authority in the room. And for the first time in my life, I realized my grandfather's greatest legacy wasn't his silence. It was the truth he left behind for me to uncover. I didn't tell my parents about the second meeting with the general. Not at first. Something told me they weren't ready to hear it, or maybe I wasn't ready to watch them dismiss it. Instead, I went back to Grandpa's house one more time before the new owners moved in. The realtor had given me a few hours to collect anything I wanted. The place was emptier than I remembered. Echoes where his voice used to be. Dust in the corners where his boots once sat. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen where he used to make oatmeal every morning. The living room where he fell asleep in his chair with the news on. The small backyard where he fed birds and repaired broken tools instead of throwing them away. This time I wasn't looking for objects. I was looking for traces. In the bedroom closet behind a row of old jackets, I found a small metal box taped to the wall. It was the kind you'd use for documents, not valuables. No lock, no label. Inside were 3 things: a folded American flag, a list of names handwritten, and a small black notebook. The notebook was thin, worn, and filled with dates and numbers. No explanations, no sentences, just coordinates, times, and short codes. It looked exactly like the kind of useless clutter my mother said my father had thrown away. Except it wasn't useless at all. I sat on Grandpa's bed and flipped through the pages. Most of it meant nothing to me, but every few entries there were small marks in the margin. The same symbol as the one inside the ring. Over and over again. I took photos of everything. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I contacted the general again. He didn't sound surprised. "Bring the notebook," he said, "not to my office, to the Veterans Center." We met in a private room in the back. 2 other men were there, both older, both wearing civilian clothes, both carrying themselves like people who once wore uniforms. The general introduced them only by first names. They studied the notebook in silence. One of them finally exhaled. He kept better records than most, the man said. "What do these numbers mean?" I asked. The general closed the notebook gently. "They're timelines," he said. "Operational markers. Your grandfather documented events that never officially occurred." "So it's proof," I said again. "Yes," he replied, "but not the kind you can take to a court or a newspaper." "Then what good is it?" I asked. The general looked at me carefully. "It's good for understanding," he said, "not for exposure." I felt frustration rise in my chest. My family treated him like he was nothing, I said. They let him die alone, and now I'm supposed to just keep this quiet. One of the older men spoke. "Your grandfather chose silence," he said. "Not because he was ashamed, but because speaking would have undone everything he worked to protect." "Protect what?" I asked. "People," he replied simply. The general nodded. "There are individuals alive today who don't know your grandfather's name," he said, "but they're alive because of him." I thought about all the times my parents called him useless. All the holidays he spent alone. All the moments I thought he'd been invisible. He hadn't been invisible. He'd been unseen. That night I finally confronted my parents. We sat at the same kitchen table where my father once complained about Grandpa's stories, the same room where my mother rolled her eyes whenever his name came up. I placed the notebook and the photos in front of them. "Do you recognize this?" I asked. My father frowned. "That old thing," he said, "I threw that out years ago." "I recovered it," I said. "It documents classified operations from the Cold War, operations Grandpa led." My mother scoffed. "You're being dramatic," she said. "He was a lonely old man, not some secret agent." I handed them the letter Grandpa had written. The one that started with, "If you're reading this." My father read it slowly. Then again. Then his hands began to shake. "This can't be real," he whispered. "It is," I said. A general confirmed it. Multiple retired officers recognized his work. My brother sat silently staring at the table. "Why didn't he tell us?" my mother asked. "Because you never wanted to hear it," I replied. That hit harder than I expected. My father leaned back in his chair. "All those years," he said quietly, "I thought he was just hiding from responsibility." "He was carrying it," I said. "So you wouldn't have to." No one spoke for a long time. Finally, my brother looked up. "He asked me for help once," he said. "I told him I was too busy." My mother covered her mouth. "I thought he was exaggerating," she whispered. "I thought he just wanted attention." I felt something shift in the room. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. You let him die alone, I said, and he never blamed you for it. My father stared at the floor. We didn't deserve him, he said. For the first time in my life, I didn't argue. I just nodded. A week later, my parents asked if we could hold a second service. A proper one. Not because of the military. Not because of recognition. But because they wanted to say goodbye. We invited the neighbors who remembered him, the veterans from the center. Even the general attended quietly, standing in the back. No speeches about heroism. No medals. Just stories. About the man who fixed bikes. About the man who brought soup when someone was sick. About the man who listened more than he spoke. My father stood at the grave. I spent my whole life measuring people by what they showed, he said, and I missed the best part of my own father. My mother cried. My brother placed the folded flag beside the headstone, and I stood there holding the ring in my palm, not as a symbol of secrets, but as proof that the quietest lives often carry the greatest weight. The second service changed something in my family. Not all at once, not in a dramatic movie-style way, but slowly, like old gears finally turning after years of rust. My parents started talking about Grandpa for the first time. Not dismissively, not with irritation, but with a kind of careful curiosity, as if they were afraid to say the wrong thing about someone they had misunderstood their entire lives. My father visited the Veterans Center on his own one afternoon. He didn't tell me until afterward. I just wanted to see where he used to go, he said quietly. To sit where he sat. My mother went back to Grandpa's old neighborhood and spoke with the woman who had called me from the hospital. She brought flowers to the neighbor's porch and apologized for never checking in. I thought he didn't need anyone, my mother told me later. I didn't realize that was just something I told myself. But reconciliation doesn't erase guilt. It just teaches you how to live with it. A few days after the second service, General Whitmore called me again. There's one more thing you should know, he said, about your grandfather's final years. We met at the same Veterans Center in the same quiet room. He brought a thin envelope this time. These are personal notes, he said, not official records, but they were shared with me by someone who served alongside him. Inside were letters. Not from Grandpa. To Grandpa. From men whose names I didn't recognize. Each one thanked him for something different. For helping them escape a country they would have died in, for protecting their families, for refusing to reveal their identities even under pressure. One line stood out in particular. You taught us that the hardest missions are the ones where no one ever knows you were there. I looked up at the general. Did he ever talk about being lonely, I asked. The general shook his head. He never complained, he said, but he once told me that the price of secrecy is isolation. I thought of all the holidays he spent alone. All the times he sat quietly while my family laughed around him. He knew what it would cost, I said. Yes, the general replied, and he paid it anyway. That night I confronted my parents again. Not with anger this time. With honesty. We sat in the living room, the same one where Grandpa had once fallen asleep in his chair. I don't blame you for not knowing, I said, but I do blame you for not trying. My father nodded slowly. I thought I was protecting myself from disappointment, he said. Turns out I was protecting myself from responsibility. My mother wiped her eyes. He never asked us for anything, she said. He asked for your time, I replied. You just didn't hear it. My brother spoke up. I used to think success meant being seen, he said. Now I'm not so sure. There was a long silence. Then my father said something I never expected to hear. I want to make this right, he said. I don't know how, but I want to try. So we did something small. We donated Grandpa's old house proceeds to a Veterans Assistance Fund. Not in his name, not publicly. Just quietly. The way he would have preferred. We started visiting the Veterans Center together once a month. My parents listened to stories, not heroic ones, just human ones. About men who missed their families, about regrets, about choices made in silence. And slowly my parents stopped talking about Grandpa as a mistake. They started talking about him as a lesson. One evening my mother asked me about the ring. Do you still wear it? She said. Yes, I replied. Does it scare you? She asked. I thought about it. No, I said. It reminds me to pay attention. She nodded. I wish I'd paid attention sooner. A few weeks later I received a letter from General Whitmore. He was retiring. In the envelope he included a final note. Your grandfather believed that the highest form of service was to leave the world better without needing credit for it. That belief is disappearing. Please don't let it. I placed the letter in the same metal box where I'd found Grandpa's things. That box no longer felt like a container for secrets. It felt like a bridge between what was hidden and what was finally understood. My parents still carry their regret. I see it in the way my father lingers by Grandpa's photo, in the way my mother lights a candle on his birthday. But they also carry something new: awareness. That not all heroes wear their achievements on their sleeves. Some carry them quietly, waiting for anyone to notice. And this time they did. The morning after General Whitmore's retirement letter arrived, I drove alone to the small cemetery where my grandfather was buried. It wasn't a grand place. No marble statues, no long rows of flags, just a quiet patch of grass on the edge of town bordered by old trees and the distant sound of traffic from a nearby road. The kind of place most people would pass without noticing, which felt appropriate. I parked, stepped out of my car, and stood for a moment with the ring in my hand. The metal had grown warm from my skin over the months, shaped slightly by the way my fingers rested around it. It no longer felt like a mystery or a burden. It felt like a responsibility. I knelt by the headstone and brushed away a few fallen leaves. My parents had finally replaced the temporary marker with a proper one. Simple, no military rank, just his name, his birth year, and the words, "Beloved father and grandfather." Nothing about seal, nothing about service. Just what mattered. "I finally understand you," I said softly. "I wish I'd said that sooner." The wind moved gently through the trees. No response, no sign. But I felt something settle inside me anyway. For most of my life, I thought strength meant being visible, being promoted, being recognized, being seen. That's what my parents believed too. They measured success in paychecks and titles. They raised us to chase achievements that could be displayed, framed, posted on walls. And Grandpa never fit into that world. He didn't talk about what he'd done. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't demand attention. So my family assumed he had done nothing. That was their mistake. And for a long time it was mine too. I thought about all the men whose letters I'd read, all the lives he'd quietly touched, all the danger he'd absorbed so others wouldn't have to. And then I thought about how he spent his final years alone, ignored, dismissed by the people who should have known him best. Not because he failed, but because he refused to advertise who he was. I placed the ring at the base of the headstone. Not forever. Just for a moment. To let it rest where it belonged. My parents arrived shortly after. We stood together in silence, the three of us. No speeches, no explanations, just quiet understanding. My father finally spoke. "I spent my whole life trying to prove myself," he said. "And I missed the one person who never tried to prove anything." My mother nodded. "I thought strength looked loud," she said. "Turns out it often looks like silence." My brother looked down at the grass. "I used to think Grandpa was invisible," he said. "Now I think he just chose not to be seen." We stayed there longer than any of us expected. And for the first time, it didn't feel like we were visiting a grave. It felt like we were finally meeting the man we'd overlooked. Later that afternoon, I returned the ring to my finger. Not as a symbol of secrets, but as a reminder. A reminder to pay attention to the quiet people. To the ones who don't interrupt conversations. To the ones who sit at the edge of the room. To the ones who help without announcing it. Because the world is full of people like my grandfather. Men and women who carry burdens no one sees. Who contribute without being credited. Who live and die without recognition. And too often they are forgotten not because they were unimportant, but because they were humble. I'm still a Marine Corps officer. I still serve. I still believe in duty-structured discipline. But my definition of success has changed. It's no longer about rank. It's about impact. It's about what remains after you're gone. Not the trophies, not the applause, but the lives you quietly improved. My family learned that lesson too late for my grandfather. But not too late for ourselves. We talk differently now, we listen more, we measure less. And when someone speaks softly at the table, no one interrupts anymore. We lean in. If you've listened to this story and felt a familiar ache, if you've ever overlooked someone who didn't demand attention, if you've ever realized too late that a quiet person carried more than you knew, Then my grandfather's life wasn't forgotten. It was passed forward. So tonight or tomorrow or the next time you sit with family, look for the quiet ones. Ask them questions. Listen without rushing. Because sometimes the greatest stories are the ones that were never told. And the greatest legacies are the ones that never asked to be remembered. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to explore more real grounded stories about quiet strength and hidden lives, you're always welcome here.